Hey, Phoenix B, Michael here. Hats are fantastic. There are 501,473,502 baseball caps in the world, but only 17 belong to me. They can be worn in a wide variety of ways. This is what makes them great. From the front, from the back, and my personal favorite, from the side, so you can look just like how the kids do these days. This is unfortunate. Wind is a force, and forces can be deadly. But is wind the deadliest force there is? Approximately 200 subscribers to the YouTuber PewDiePie will die within the next week of wind. According to the American Meteorological Association, tornadoes are the deadliest type of natural disaster. Tornadoes are, of course, wind. Or are they? The Earth is a sphere. Well, how do we use the Earth's sphericity? Imagine you're trying to minimize the chances of dying to wind. Well, wind is modeled on the Earth as a line from one place to another. At each point on this sphere, this Earth, we associate a line that points from here to the direction in which the wind is traveling in. To minimize the chances of dying from wind, we want to find a place such that the wind has no direction. It is simply zero. But how do we know such a point exists? The Harry Ball theorem states that any point, any non-vanishing vector field on a sphere, that is one of these, will have a point on which it is zero. This essentially means that there is a point on Earth where there is no wind, no direction in which it travels with. These four objects are all donuts. Well, how is this, and even this a donut? First, let's take a look at a donut. A donut is this geometric figure with the property that it is one hole and looks roughly like this. Well, how do we know that this is a donut? In fact, doesn't this have two holes? One over here, and one over here? Well, we can think of this hole as in fact being removed when we collapse this object through. And eventually, when we collapse it down, this thing will remain, and we get a donut. What about this? Well, once again, we can think of taking this length and squishing it downwards eventually until it matches the height of this over here, and, well, you get a donut. Well, what about this car over here? In fact, how does this even resemble a donut? You can think of this little hole through the window as being a donut hole, and through bending and adjusting the car's characteristics in a manner similar to how we did these two, we can in fact turn it into one of these. But what does this all lead to? It immediately leads to the question, is the Earth a donut? But come on, the Earth isn't a sphere, it's an oblate spheroid. It isn't smooth, but can we make it smooth? Well, how do we answer this question? Let's go take a look at the Earth. The Earth is a balloon. It is a sphere. This object over here is a sphere. It is a balloon. Well, can we turn this balloon or sphere into a donut like this via the actions of pressing or otherwise adjusting the characteristics of the shape without punching a hole or something into it? Well, let's go take a look. Let's try to bend this. Well, if we try to bend it, it'll pop, and popping isn't really something that looks like a donut. Try squeezing, but once again, that doesn't make any holes. Well, what happens if we try to create a hole? Our Earth is destroyed. In fact, this isn't even a donut. The Hairy-Ball theorem only works on things equivalent to spheres, that is, 3D objects that do not have an interior thing inside of it. So, for example, this hollow sphere. It also doesn't have any holes, but what if we want to go on someplace that does have holes? Well, it's certainly not the Earth. We need to go somewhere more real. Outer space. But if the Earth isn't a donut, what about the Moon? I mean, come on, the Moon is pretty similar to the Earth. It probably shouldn't have any holes in it. Ever since the Renaissance age, philosophers had argued over the question, what is the Moon made of? Most, in fact, all up to a certain point thought it was made of some form of dairy product, usually cheese. Well, some types of cheese have holes, right? I mean, some don't, like this cheddar over here. How do we extend this to the Moon? I mean, the Moon has craters, but those aren't really holes. You can think of smoothing them out. So, well, what do we do from here? The answer is not so obvious. We have to go look at the accumulation of water in a specific crater right over here. It is a anachromal drainage disorder. This is the technical term in astronomy for this type of crater. And this crater, in fact, has had a large accumulation of water inside of it. And this water has poured in to the rocks and other things and has actually managed to create a fairly prototypical hole. Well, how do we know it exists? The thing is, we're not so sure up until the moon landing. Well, at the moon landing, the astronauts took samples of the soil and noted that there had to be a hole there. And, well, now that we're sure that there is indeed a hole on the moon, how do we turn the moon into something like this, a donut, a prototypical example of one? We can think of this hole, we can try to take it and extend the moon around. Afterwards, we compress this into the diameter of this. And then afterwards, try to expand this up the height of this, and, well, you get a donut. Or do we? As it turns out, there is another hole on the moon. It is located where the astronauts who were on the moon landing mission placed the famous flagpole. This is the original flag that was placed on the moon, right over here. It turns out that when they put the flagpole down, the accumulation that we talked about before of lacrinal drainage created an effect whereby the rocks on the moon were disturbed, and eventually there was a almost microscopic hole going through the moon, and it leads to an exit. In fact, this exit is not straight down, it's curved a little, but we'll get to that later. Now that we've discussed the moon, we have to realize this is an unrealistic picture. It paints the moon as a zero-hold sphere. A much more realistic way to think about it would be this. It is a two-hole donut. But this isn't really a donut, is it? Well, as mentioned before, we can think of morphing this eventually into what looks like this, but with an additional hole. From here, let's look at the differences with Earth. Unlike the Earth, the moon will have wind at every point. But why? Well, let's remember, the Earth is a sphere, and as we already mentioned, by the Hairy-Ball theorem, there will exist a point on the sphere at which the wind is zero. But for something like this, there does not, in fact, always exist a point at which the wind is zero. So you are never safe from the wind. But is there a point to finding this point, i.e. a point at which the wind is zero? As it turns out, not really. If we can't even predict the weather within 2 weeks, how can we be certain of anything? I mean, after all, the weather is a pretty simple phenomenon. It's just something that's happening outside. Maybe rain, maybe snow, maybe sun. And it really raises the question, what we know and what we see is all random. Well, right at this point in time, I can't predict what the world will look like in 1 year. So clearly, there's not even a notion of permanence. How do I know one of these objects is permanent? How do I know I am permanent? After all, I don't even know whether or not I will be here in 1 year for certain. Take a look at something a bit closer to home. Your clothes, you, your body, the things surrounding you. If their developments are random and you can't predict their dynamics, how do you even know that they exist? How do you know that you're not hallucinating and that randomness is just as a result of your brain being uncertain? After all, how do you know that everything around you exists in one way or the other? After all, there's not really a good reason for us to exist. In fact, there's not even a good reason for this video to exist, or for this YouTube channel to exist. And as always, thanks for watching.